Good evening. My name is Alexis Cala, and I will be facilitating this evening together with Clément Fan.
Hi.
So thank you for joining for our second wealth management evening. And thank you also to our sponsor, Safra Sarasin, for the support he's providing us with. So we hope you'll find tonight's webinar about AI and wealth management thought-provoking. We have four great speakers with us. Sergio, who is co-founder and CEO of the Side World Group. Tomasz, who is head of thematic equities and technology portfolio manager at Safra Sarasin. And Hussein, who is co-portfolio manager of the Tech Disruption Fund. And Annabelle, who is a member of the Institute of Business Ethics Advisory Council and a researcher in tech ethics after many years in institutional asset management. So the program, we will start actually by looking at what is under the hood of a generative AI model, and that will be with Sergio. And then we'll try to look at what we call three intersections of generative AI and wealth management. And Clément will question Tomasz and Hussein about the generative AI investment thesis. And then Annabelle and I actually will discuss how generative AI could be a potential solution, but also a source of risks, a source of ESG risks. And finally, we'll ask the four speakers to share their views on how generative AI can possibly contribute to the daily practice of wealth management. So to give you a sense, each session should be about 15 minutes long. And also, please do ask questions using the Q&A functionality as we go along, as we will try actually to answer a selection at the end of it. So now, in case you are wondering, I did not use ChatGPT to write this introduction. So let's now start learning more about the mechanics behind generative AI and with Sergio. Thank you.
First of all, how does it all start? It starts with a large database, all right? That's called internet. And in the internet, we have a lot of things, a lot of knowledge from human people, a lot of creativity, a lot of very well composed sentences. There is a lot of information in there. The thing is, they all have different format. Machine learning scientists are used to work with numbers. So we will see how all along the process there are a lot of abstractions towards being able to work with numbers. And by the way, beware, because we're in a very complex world nowadays where there's a lot of, there's an arms race when it comes to artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced machine learning, etc. So you have, by the way, probably you have like 60% of what's in the internet and sentences, all right? Those sentences are like, the cat is black, all right? Fine, the cat is black. Then we can go in here and apply through a function of tokenization, all right, as it's called, but we simply can come here and see how relevant the different words are, all right? For instance, probably cat is more relevant than and is, and also black, okay? So depending on different dimensions of those words within this database, we can create different descriptions for the relevance of the different words that compose that sentence, all right? Fine. So all of a sudden, instead of having a sentence, we have a vector of numbers, let's say 10, 13, 457, 7, and 9,432. And that will be the tokens. So, wow. Now we're talking about numbers. We are happy. That's the first step. Cool. Tokens. But what happens? we can be smarter at this tokenization, and we have better ways to understand the different dimensions behind every single word. So why not to apply a different function, let's say G instead of F, and get to have more information behind these numbers, again vectors, tuk, 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 one vector here, one vector here, one vector here, and one vector here. And imagine, in the end you end up for each word or its token, you can have 10,000 dimensions, let's say. But that's too much, and especially most of those dimensions are not like, there is no intersection on the nature of different words. For instance, I don't know, heat, whether something is cold or it's hot, may not be relevant to, I don't know, to a car. So most of the time you don't have, well, a car actually, the engine yes, but not the car, or I don't know, these type of things. I mean, there's a lot of dimensions that you're not going to be able to fill out for every single word. So in the end, you end up with very large matrices that are sparse, that have a lot of zeros. And playing around with zeros, as you know, is horrible, and you cannot invert matrices, etc. So what do? You, through a process, so let's say here we have like enriched, let's call this enriched tokens. So we embed, as it's called, we embed these 10,000 dimensions into dense vectors, let's say 16 dimensions, all right, through the process of embedding, which is very similar, let's say, to principal component analysis, where you have n dimensions, and apparently with the first 3-4 dimensions you can explain 90% of the information that's in the matrix most of the time, let's say. Okay, so these type of things, it's like the equivalence to the PCA. Fine. So now you have the embedded inputs, let's call it. Okay. When it comes to dealing with data as a data engineering process, but definitely it's already far away from mimicking intelligence or human intelligence. And a query, like the prompt or the sentence, is like, I would like to know this. So for these keys, give me the value. All right? So that's pretty much the context. Fine, because if we manage to have this very matrix, and if it was solid enough across examples, across the universe of possible examples, if it converges, let's say, we will be able to use it to create another sentence. So our guy is saying here, I want to know this or that, and then you would use, fine, I project it through this key, and you get the value. The value is the outcome, all right? The value is what ChatGPT is telling you, basically, all right? So, but it is, so how do we do that? So they said, okay, cool, for each of these ones, which is an X, we will try to do something. X times W equals Q, X times the key equals K, times W, WQ, WK, and X times WV equals the value, all right? So if we keep playing around with these weights over here, at some point we will find a series of Q's, K's, and values, queries, keys, and values that will create these matrices, all right, for which we will find a solution, all right? And once we find the solution, then we will talk about a cross attention, which is when this guy comes over here, it replaces this Q, all right? It uses this estimated K and it gets its own value, all right? So this is how it would work. On paper, it sort of makes sense, but in the end, what are we really doing here? First and foremost, how can we value these values, by the way, the quality of what we're doing here? Because these are the answers from the machine. How many answers are good? How many of them are bad? What are we doing? How are we going to value that? There's no way to do that. There's no, like an R squared. There's no such a thing here. There's no R squared. So we have a very interesting problem. Second, this overfitting, this is a brute force. Crazily, brute force. Recall, we are talking about all the internet data, so you need a lot of money, okay? That's why all these companies raise so much money. Actually, Mistral AI, for instance, raised a lot of money because they need a lot of brute force. And then brute force leads to overfitting of the parameters so that the KPI is properly optimized, all right? But there's no such thing as a KPI, as I said before. So we have an issue here as well. There's no R squared. So what are we overfitting on thin air? Well, pretty much so, all right? Because this is all, as I said, extremely abstract. And by the way, note that there are a lot of things here that are key. Many of them, like the enriched tokens, how you embed these inputs, and obviously how you deal with this. And this, even though it's called key value, and this is a problem from machine learning overall, that we put names that are not right, even though because they are cool, but they are not right, and then we confuse people all around the world, for real, as it's happening. Because, by the way, there's no attention along all this. There's no, at least nothing. We would need to define attention, same way as there is no such thing as natural language processing natural, or neural networks. To me, they have little to do with neurons for real. So, and in this case, not only there's no attention in my view, but there's no even key value as in a database. Like there's a query for the database and a key and a value. Like most non-SQL databases are like that, because you can have a lot of information there. Again, they are eloquent names for the expert, but they are confusing names for the non-expert. So just don't miss that point, because then you can end up applying this tool the wrong way. Reinforcement learning, human feedback, it's what they came up with in order to make sure they were able to alter all this optimization problem through the views of a person. All right? A lot of them, actually, working on what's the best ranking for all the possible outcomes from this very, let's say, query. All right? Actually, it's a sentence that becomes an embedded input, and that's a query, all right? But anyhow, it's like, okay, so we have this, out of this amount of outputs that can become your V, which one is the best? So this person says, I think this makes sense. For instance, the sentence could perfectly be, the cat is, and the answer could be, I don't know, breech, black, or pet, all right? And this should have a price of -5, this should be L7, and this should be 6, because it wouldn't make much sense, even though it's a pet, it's true, but the sentence, the structure of the sentence wouldn't make a lot of sense. So, as you put someone doing some tasks over here, you are able to affect the calibration towards an R squared that now depends on this guy, with all the pros and cons that has, okay? as long as the distribution that's generating the data is steady, it's stable, the more you can use your previous learning. Else, if there is after any change of context, the shape and even the average of the distribution changes a lot, then you may have an issue. All right, like in finance. In finance, we all know that when there's a change in the context, which is every other minute, there's a change in the distribution that's generating the data. So you have to be aware of what can be used this tool for, what's robust and what not, etc., etc. But it is driven by results. So it's like, well, adding one more layer to this neural network, it seems that works. So everyone is adding one more layer, even though there is no neat proof of why it's working, all right, beyond results. I mean, if I was to figure out a new point for the x, all right, it's like, well, I have another observation of type whatever. What would you expect its y to be? We would say the average, which is here. Cool. But then, you know, with OLS, etc., they understood there was a shape, there was a slope over there, and said, okay, cool. So for this, I think it will be here instead. Fine. What are we doing in this case? So for many years now, in statistics, in econometrics, etc., we've been creating data. So this is, again, generative AI. At least they didn't say it was creative AI, because that's another word that they are using nowadays. There's no creativity whatsoever in here. Not even any, I mean, there's nothing linked to the idea of creativity. It's all based on this database, where there is creativity from the human, if anything. And at least they didn't call it creative AI, they call it generative AI, and it's good because they are generating new points. But the thing is, we will also be able to generate new points, but always upon this thingy, all right, upon the line directly. What are these guys doing? Pretty much they are creating new points over here, all right? Maybe one point here, another point here, another point here, and then maybe another point here, all right? What does it mean? It means that there is a lot of errors from all this process, which makes sense because the process itself is not too clean, all right? So we have to understand that as a structural part of the tool. And they called it, instead of errors, hallucinations. Because we are talking about AI, right? So we have to be cool about how to put a name to the errors. But they are errors, hallucinations. The thing is, it's true actually. Everything is a hallucination. The only thing is that sometimes these guys are right, all right? But everything is a freaking hallucination because it has nothing to do with the way we humans typically think. So actually, to me, this is all about hallucinations that most of the time are right, because in any process we're looking for the expected value. So we are always trying to not to deviate much from what's going on, generating the data. So on average they will be right, but sometimes they will be extremely wrong. The thing is sometimes they are wrong even here, very close to this. Like they invent references for papers that do not exist but could have existed, because those people they are mentioning typically research together. So these type of errors are they are not naive for things like recommender systems like Netflix and things like that, where nobody really cares for the errors at all. That they are not accurate and people couldn't care less. But when it comes to finance or health and things like that, you should never use such a thing, all right? It's not a disruption again in terms of creativity, in terms of knowledge from the machines. No, this is just databases looking for expected values. in a very abstract way. However, what's relevant is the usage of all this. So that can be disruptive, because now these people can do a lot of things, and there can be a lot of wrong things, and we have not only to regulate that, but we have to teach everyone so that they understand what's right and what's wrong. What do I expect from the future? I expect this to happen more often. I expect more augmented machines, so that there's room for humans going forward, and we need to keep on researching on that. And that's all by my side. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, I think a few years ago, all of us were afraid of matrix calculus for what it was. But I think if we look at the newspaper, you know, it seems now people are becoming afraid of matrix calculus for what it can do, actually.
Okay.
And we're going to move
Thomas, as the head of thematic equities and lead portfolio manager of the tech sector for JSS, can you just start by explaining us and giving some insights about what are the key drivers of the strong performance of the tech sector this year?
Sure. Very good question. So, I mean, I would just start by, sharing a disclaimer, which we have to do. So basically, like everything what you will hear today from me and from Hussein, those are our personal statements, so they don't represent bank's view. What we will say today is not an investment recommendation. Our views can change without further notice, and we will discuss some stocks, and we may or may not be invested in those specific stocks. Yeah, so just to set it out and share the disclaimer. Yeah, so I think it's a good question. So what are the key drivers of this very strong performance of the technology sector this year? And I think the simple answer would be ChatGPT had it all, right? That ChatGPT has basically driven this massive rally in the technology sector. But I think what makes sense is to step back and think a bit broader. What is actually happening in the technology sector? As I believe in the recent 12 to 18 months, we have seen series of positive developments that have changed the perception of the technology sector. So first of all, we all heard about the US-China trade tensions. We heard about supply chain crisis, and I think what those events amplified, they have, they made investors realize that tech sector is strategically important. The tech sector is core and the backbone of the innovation across the entire economy, and without technology, each nation will have difficulties to progress. Yeah. For instance, without semiconductors, there will be no flying taxis in Heathrow. Without power semi, another part of semiconductors, technologies such as renewables, solar, and so on, will have difficulties to be deployed on the broader scale. Yeah. So I think first of all was this change of perception that tech is actually the backbone of the broader economy. Now I think another development that I found very interesting is that the tech companies, they have been for many years over-investing and under-earning. Yeah? So we have seen that, for example, one of the major mega cap tech companies has been doubling the number of employees every 2 quarters. Yeah, so there has been massive investment to capture growth. What has happened this year is that many tech companies realized that actually we need to control also our cost base. So tech moved from just focusing on growth on focusing more to kind of on profitable growth. Yeah, so this was the second change that happened in the tech sector. Now the third thing, which I think is also very relevant, and the SVB banking crisis has showed it to us, is that on the broader equity market, the perception of the quality factor, what really is quality, is changing. So historically, when we were thinking about quality, we were thinking about sectors such as consumer staples, such as pharma, so those very defensive type of sectors. Yeah. However, if we step back and we look at characteristics of many of the tech companies, in particular software, those companies, they have high operating margins, they have very high predictability of revenues, and at the same time, they offer this massive growth. Yeah, so you get growth with quality together, and that's why tech was so resilient during the SVB and the broader US banking crisis. Yeah, of course, the interest rate environment is also helping us. Yeah, so as we are nearing the end of the hiking cycle, the more expensive sector such as technology is the major beneficiary of this trend. And to conclude, of course, the last driver and probably the most relevant one was generative AI. As what generative AI has effectively done, it has democratized the field of artificial intelligence. It has brought AI to the masses. It has showed many people how you can actually apply and use this and use this technology. Yeah? So I would say those are the 5 drivers that stand behind the very strong performance of the tech sector this year.
Thank you, Thomas. The following question will be for Hussein. We have seen quite a new hype for Gen AI on the markets this year. As Thomas just mentioned, we have seen this kind of pattern in the past with the internet bubble and even the crypto bubble a few years ago. What is different today? Are we keen to reproduce the past, or is it really something that we have to invest now in?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Clement, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I think it is a fair question to ask, right? If it is another hype, like a tech hype that tech is really good at generating. So I think it's different this time. I mean, I know it's tricky to say it's different this time, but I think it really is. I mean, first of all, if you think about it, this large language models and generative AI, there are really one of the largest companies are behind this technology, right? Microsoft invested in OpenAI, they put in 10 billion. And we know Google has been investing in its technology for a while. All the other companies like Meta and the other software companies. So it is not a Silicon Valley project, but this time the big tech companies, the deep pockets, they've been investing in this technology, and they will keep investing. So this is the first difference. And the second, I would say that I think comparing to crypto, the biggest difference is that the generative AI and the ChatGPT particularly, the ordinary person like you and me, we can go and play with this technology, right? I think ChatGPT, I checked it this morning, it is the second most downloaded app here in Switzerland. I think it is the same in the States globally. So an ordinary person can go to an app, ask some, even the silly questions, and challenge the app, ask the same questions again and again to try, whether the ChatGPT answers differently. But what matters, what is important is that you are basically engaging yourself, and an ordinary person is engaging yourself with the technology, getting familiar with the technology, and it's fun to play, to be honest. And it's also useful to, learn about a topic that you're interested in. Whereas in crypto, I think it was a bit different, right? That there were some interesting use cases like decentralized finance and all that, but it was a bit tricky that you needed to be a bit tech savvy to put your wallet in as an add-in, and then hot wallet, cold wallet, all the decentralized finance as a concept was a bit vague for some people. So if you're not really interested in the technology and the application, you wouldn't deal with it, right? So I think that is the second major difference. And lastly, I think every time a new technology comes out, we need to ask ourselves what technology does it good for us, for humanity, or in general, right? So I think crypto, it has it came as a sort of a means of payment. Then we realized that actually the other networking companies are better and faster at processing, cheaper at processing the payments. Then it was a store of value arguments, which was still a question mark. It is, I think, to be seen. And again, the decentralized finance aspect was a bit of still a niche. This was, but if you compare it with this large language models and generative AI, we can see improvement in the productivity already in many industries, such as the coders, right? I mean, I was looking at a survey last week that the software development, they've been using this technology for a while now, and they're happy to use with it. Also the designers, right? What all these designer companies like Adobe, Midjourney, there's a couple of them out there. So they're also increasing the productivity of the designers. And then we can see many use cases in which this technology could be helpful for the users, like in healthcare, like even for the lawyers, even for us, right? That for finance professionals. So I think we might be, this technology might to humanity or to productivity compared to what the computers did in the 90s, 80s, so increase the productivity. So I think if you compare the from this aspect, I think it is quite different. So bottom line, I think it is quite different, both in terms of the financing and the use cases than the crypto, for instance.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Hussein. So we better understand now what are the implications. Productivity can see a huge increase. It's easy to access. It's easy to use, and it's funny for the retail clients too. So we have a better grasp on the opportunities. Maybe Thomas, now can you just help us understand how the value chain is organized? What are the different actors in the Gen AI industry, and how can they benefit? How do they make money?
Yeah, sure. So the way how we think about the generative AI value chain, we divided in 4 parts. So first one is infrastructure, another one is models, data, and application layer. Yeah. So if we just kind of go down into each of those very briefly and describe what are the key premises and what is our investment and what is the investment opportunity. So starting with infrastructure, actually, we think this is the most attractive part of the entire value chain, because generative AI is nothing else as, AI on steroids, where we will need to use much more data and we need to run those algorithms in much more efficient way. We'll deploy much more parallel processing. So I think infrastructure is very relevant. And by infrastructure, we mean either semiconductor companies, so processing semiconductors like NVIDIA, Intel, AMD. We think semiconductor equipment companies that provide equipment to build those new chips, like Applied Materials, Lam Research, and so on. And of course, the hyperscalers. Yeah, so hyperscalers, the companies that build the data centers like Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Service, and so on. And then on top of this, you need connectivity solutions. So you need various companies such as Ciena, Infinera, and so on to connect all those servers together. Yeah. And in our view, this layer is extremely attractive because regardless of who will win this AI race, the infrastructure companies, they will be massive beneficiaries. Yeah. What is also interesting on the infrastructure side is that in order to enable this massive transition to generative AI and to increase massively computing power, we will have to change the computing paradigm. So we'll have to change the way how the innovation in the semiconductor space is being deployed. So as you know, for the last decade, the whole innovation in the space of semiconductor engineering and technology was driven by miniaturization, by something what is by phenomenon called Moore's law, where basically we were doubling the number of transistors on the semiconductor chip every 18 months. Yeah. Right now, we are reaching some physical limitations. We cannot shrink anymore. So we are moving to vertical efficiencies. We'll be using new materials engineering. We'll be blending different types of materials. We'll be using different packaging technologies and so on. And there is a whole value chain of companies, such as, again, Applied Materials, Onto Innovation, and many other names that are massive beneficiaries of this generational change. Yeah. So infrastructure, big opportunity. Now I will run quickly through the 3 different ones. So basically on the model side, we don't think models are a big differentiator. So ChatGPT was the first one, but then Google came with the Expand model. Afterwards, Baidu came with the Ernie model. And actually, we don't see much differentiation between those models. So we will not focus on the model layer. Data is interesting part because whenever the company has unique data that can actually be monetized, like for example, some insurance companies, e-commerce companies, what they will do, they will take those general models developed by ChatGPT, developed by Google, and they will build on top of them, they will build industry-specific solution, and they will try to monetize those. Yeah. So every company that has some unique data that are difficult to collect, that are difficult to replicate, actually is an advantage. Yeah. And ultimately application. So we see here opportunities. Again, I don't think there will be at this stage, killer app that will change everything. But I think what will happen is that companies that have wide distributions, that have lots of users, they will be attaching the AI capabilities to those applications. So if you think, about Microsoft, Adobe, huge user bases, and AI will actually help them to monetize and increase the overall value of the product. Yeah. So this is how we see basically the whole AI value chain and the key beneficiaries.
Okay. Thank you very much, Thomas. You're saying for our clients in the wealth management industry, or even for ourselves, we are not tech specialists or even Gen AI specialists. So in your opinion, what would be the key factors to look at for an investor when considering an investment in a Gen AI startup or in an established company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we are a thematic fund, and then for any kind of technology, we are looking at the entire value chain, as Tomasz described, and it's the same in this case. And I should say that we are not making our investment decisions purely based on generative AI opportunity, but it's a nice add-on for the companies, or increasing the moat for the companies that we already own in the portfolio. So having said that, like Tomasz said, data is very important. These companies that have the unique data, property data, they can fine-tune these models, and then they can basically serve their customers better, increase their ARPU. So I will definitely look for a company that has a unique data set and rich data set. And I think because you mentioned startups versus enterprises, I think enterprises have a little bit of edge here because they are already working with established companies. I mean, they're already working with some customers. Whereas startups, I mean, if you think about the startup in the past, they were finding a problem. They were quite agile, and they were attacking this problem with a point solution, and they were getting the customers right. But in this case, in order to train these models, you need to have data. And then, so that's why the incumbents or established companies, they have a bit of edge here. And we think that will also, that advantage will sort of increase the vendor consolidation we've been seeing in the industry for a year, right? I mean, because now the IT budgets are a bit of under pressure, and what we see from the people out there is that instead of going to have different point products, point solutions, they are already working with the platform companies that can offer more than many solutions. And I think that's what's going to happen. So we already seen some of the largest software companies having plans to integrate technology into their product suites. So that will be another opportunity for incumbents.
Okay, thank you very much, Hussein. Thank you very much, Tomasz.
Yeah. And we're going to move in the third session actually with Annabelle. And Annabelle, my first question to you is, can you describe a little bit more, all those risks and fears that I'm sure many of us have been reading in the newspaper?
Yeah, all of the risks we may not quite have time to cover in the next 10 minutes, or even that's probably a webcast of its own. The main risk for me actually is what Sergio said just at the end there, which is that actually everything it produces is hallucination. The main risk is that we as humans using the machine don't understand what it can and can't do and its limitations. And you've seen examples of that already. I mean, I would say that's gone from risk into actually a harm that's already exhibiting. You've probably all read the sad story about the man in Belgium who killed himself after an extended discussion with ChatGPT, but of course it's not a sentient being actually taking one side of that discussion. Or the lawyer in the US who used ChatGPT to file his case, and it was full of hallucinations, and he hadn't checked. So one of the biggest risks that I see is that we use it unthinkingly, and we assume and associate a level of human understanding, when really what it is a massive probability curve, and most of the time it gets it right, and so that's the big risk. But I mean, so there are some great resources on this if people want them afterwards. A really good visual that I saw before that I'm happy to share categorize the risks in terms of privacy, control, economic, social, performance. And if we think about the average individual person, when they look at ChatGPT, probably the first time they played with it, they went, wow, what an amazing, I can see how I can use this to save time in this, that, and the other. And then the second thought they had was, hang on, am I still going to be needed in my job when this thing can? So I see one of the biggest risks kind of from at a human level is that kind of sense of, are our jobs going? And so again, figuring out how we use these things so that it helps us do more of the good stuff without kind of taking away or devaluing what it is, what we can offer, I think is critical.
So what's being done actually, you know, and what can we do? What shall we do as organizations, you know, as individual in various industry, you know? What's your view on that?
What can we do? Well, I think the finance industry has a magnificently powerful role to play, which is we're seeing through ESG. There's you know, it's not just the efficient allocation of capital and the provision of financial returns in people's retirement or ill health or, you know, whatever that might be. It's also actually as stewards of that capital to offer a kind of soft regulation sounds too strong, but a kind of active responsibility check. And I think we in the industry have a fabulous role to play, because there's a real problem with regulating AI. It's moving too fast. is the main reason. Hardly anybody understands it. The minute you write a law, unless you're really careful, by the time a law comes into being, the technology will be completely different anyway. So there is a real issue about getting the regulation to work here, and there is some movement on that, which is fantastic. But something that the finance industry is better able to do is bring that kind of pragmatic, forward-looking approach. So I think helping to hold technology companies themselves accountable, and also all the other companies in which we invest, to ask them questions about how they're using tech, how they're deploying it, what they're doing with their people, the questions they ask of tech suppliers, trying to kind of champion a kind of ethical or responsible approach to the use of tech throughout the value system. I think finance is almost uniquely placed in being able to have that role.
Staying with the maybe, you know, this ethics question, actually, what are the new traits that they are bringing to, you know, that Gen AI is bringing, and everybody's discussing data privacy, and here in Europe, you know, we have a lot of regulation, and it seems there is, you know, big tech company and their regulation trying to find a common ground. So could you just, you know, clarify a little bit the situation
for
there?
Sure. Actually, can I just say though, I mean, GDPR has a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong, but I have to say, first and foremost, it's like Europe has led the world here, and it's proven, but with GDPR, number one, that actually you can regulate without completely killing the golden goose, which is what many of the tech companies argued before. But they've actually been able to make the case for regulation by having a successful, and they've also demonstrated and proven that we actually do all care about privacy. We've been a bit quick to give it away with some of the tech companies, because we love convenience and shiny things, you know, and all the wonderful things our phone can do, and even now, even after GDPR, probably most people just click allow all. Yes, allow all. Why are you bothering me with these cookies? But it makes the case, and it shows that we do value this stuff. And so you are seeing norms change. You're seeing norms and expectations change within the industry. And again, the EU has shown leadership with the forthcoming AI Act. Again, it's not perfect. Of course it's not. We're regulating something that's brand new and moving constantly. Of course we're not going to get it right. But by showing it's possible, and by having that will, and the fact that many of these companies are global, so even if you're a company in the US, what Europe does really matters. In a way that may not be the case for all sectors, has kind of made sure it's got on the agenda in the UK and the US perhaps earlier. You know, I like to think that's been a bit of competitive tension that's caused the US and the UK to act. And because, okay, so if you don't want to go the same way as the well, come up with your solution. But the solution isn't no regulation here. These changes are too profound. Would we want a car industry where there's no safety measures? Would we want a health service where you don't have to license and test the drugs? You know, what's happening with AI, and I think although generative AI, I don't think materially changes what's possible. What it has done is bring it into the public consciousness. Now everybody sees that actually this is a transformative thing that's happening. It's going to change everything. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe over the course of the next 10 years or 20 years, but the changes are going to be profound. And so they can't just be made in isolation by a handful of tech bros in Silicon Valley. This has to be something that we do together. So I've gone off down a sidetrack, haven't I? Did that answer your question, Alexi, or do I?
No, it does. No, it does. But actually, you know, I'm happy to just maybe dig a little bit deeper on this regulation, and what are the positives, you know, what are the pretty concerning, you know, aspect of those regulations as well, just zooming out of Europe and looking more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that concerns me is the pretty heavy duty lobbying that's going on. We're seeing, and I should also say we shouldn't generalize about tech. There's a couple of very powerful tech companies that sometimes get all of our attention, but there has been a bit of saying one thing and doing another behind the scenes. Everybody's saying yes, regulators, but quietly doing what they can to avoid that, and that's not helpful. I think you absolutely need to have industry in the room. There have been some good developments in Singapore and other places with sandboxes. I think regulation can be used actually as a way to say, look, here, let's make the playing ground fair. You don't have to be kind of undercutting the next guy. Let's solve some of these problems together. But we can't have it run by the tech companies. There has to be kind of counterbalanced with people who can represent society's interests at large and the kind of human dimension. And that is hard because who is aligned with what we all need to get out of it. But I think it is possible, and I think there have been really good movements on that in the last 6 to 12 months. So I feel more optimistic about regulation than I did a year ago. That's for sure. But I do think like it needs a number of different component parts. It needs some regulation, but the amount you can actually regulate is probably limited. And I do quite like probably the only thing I like about the UK's approach at the moment, actually, but one of the things I do like about it is they're trying to focus on, instead of actually carving out technology as something different, let's still hold all the same things, let's make everybody accountable for the impacts. And if you happen to be having that impact through technology, well, you're just as responsible as if you did it through some other means. So, and I think that is the way this will go, because we'll everything will become embedded over time anyway. So upskilling is difficult in regulation, getting sufficient funding for it's going to be difficult, getting it to be fast moving enough. I think we have to be pragmatic. I think it has to be agile. We absolutely don't want to stifle innovation here, because number one, this could possibly be the answer to all the productivity concerns of the developed world. Number two, look at the health and amazing kind of medicinal prospect. There's huge prize on offer here, but we just need to do it responsibly. Like with any powerful tool, you can't just it needs some guardrails, and it needs some protective surroundings. But I do think there's positive progress there.
Maybe last question, ESG.
Yeah.
So what can AI do in that domain? I would say maybe at the macro level and also, at the individual level of, a financial professional. Is there a good contribution?
Right. So, I mean, I think, again, it's been slow. I think the industry has been focused, rightly so, for worrying about carbon. I mean, but goodness, that is a big problem. So it's understandable that the E of ESG has come first, and that there are particular metrics within the E that have been the main concern. But I think there is a growing awareness that actually we should be looking at tech deployment through the ESG lens as well. And I think each of the, like with anything, it's the how that it's the how. It isn't all good and all bad. There are really good examples environmentally. There's clean tech. There are some revolutionary, hopefully, solutions to some of our climate crisis coming through technology. On the social side, there's whether it be mobile banking or educational provision, there's huge potential that AI and technology in general brings, and then governance. There's a really strong democratizing element to AI. What happens with Gen AI, if we could 100% rely on what was coming out of it, is you've suddenly made all knowledge accessible to anyone, anywhere. I mean, that's wow. That's a hugely democratizing feature. But as with all these things, it's not all good. There's also a cost, and we do need to be mindful of that. So some figures came out recently, and again, I can share this with any participants who want to dig a little bit deeper. There's actually a dedicated webinar on this next week. So GPT actually is quite costly environmentally from both an electricity and a water point of view. There's the use of it, but there's also the training of it. So the servers that you need to run in order for all those millions of parameters and dimensions that Sergio mentioned, all that modeling, costs a lot of energy, and the servers need a lot of cooling. And then there's the ongoing use, and then there's mining and lithium and all the obsolescence and all the rest of the things that come with tech. And then at a social level, we've seen some biases, and Gen AI, it's been trained on all the information in the internet. Well, we all know there are issues with some of the information in the internet, and there are issues with some of the data that's been collected historically. It contains some biases, and you can get real feedback loops within AI. So unless you're actively managing those biases, they actually become magnified and entrenched rather than undone. And the thing that probably worries me most, actually, of all the three, is the governance issue, because I think one of the problems that we've had from, and although this has been more of an issue of social media, I think this whole question about hallucinations with Gen AI brings it here, is people not knowing what they can believe anymore and not knowing what's true. And I think that's had a real issue on trust in our political, economic and social environment. And it's undermined some of the institutions that have actually, it's very easy to take that for granted, but that's been a foundation that has enabled the kind of economic development and prosperity that we've seen, has been the fact that we can rely on these institutions, and they have been undermined and hollowed out a little bit by the last 10 years of technological change that we've seen. It's absolutely not too late. And I think some of the problem is that the institutions were fit for the past, and they're not future fit, frankly, and they do need to evolve and change. But we got to get ahead of that, because I think that bit really matters. And from a UN SDG point, that's UN SDG 16, I think. It really, that if I had to pick out one thing that I was worried about with AI ethics, it would be that.
Well, thank you. I think the time's for us to move. Actually, we have some time pressure, and I think each of the session could be a full webinar. But I think we wanted to explore kind of a last intersection of Gen AI and wealth management, and that's really about the practice, And Clément, I will pass back actually the floor to you, maybe to start asking some question about this practice in wealth management. You're on mute, remember.
I'm sorry. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Sergio, if you're with us, one question, because we will focus now a little bit on the advisory and investment process for the wealth management industry, and we all have this question in mind. Can we use Gen AI like ChatGPT or another one to really discover new investment ideas or new investment strategies? Because you discussed it in your video and said that using only ChatGPT like it is today is not a good idea, but maybe you know how to use it, and give us your insights on it.
Thanks for that. Thanks for having me here. And sorry, I don't have the video on because I'm not at the office. Very tight week. Well, yes, I said that before, and to be honest with you, I'm seeing, the thing is, it's a wonderful tool, but it comes with too much marketing and lobby from Silicon Valley. All right. Just like blockchain, people are confusing the tool with their platform. These things are tools. They are nice tools to be used, to be optimized, to be calibrated, to everything, but they are not the platform. They are not the machine in machine learning. We're still missing the machine in machine learning. The machine, we've been focusing for many years now in the learning, which is great, but who's focused on the M, the machine in machine learning with all the algorithms, etc. Let me tell you something. For instance, myself, I've been investigating for many years now on that M, and what I've arrived to a conclusion, which is we need a more virtual reality simulation. All right, because everything is becoming more and more complex, and especially in finance, where, as I said, the distributions are not steady at all. Hence, you need to train the machine with a myriad of possible outcomes, but with small data each, because they don't last. They are not like biology or a game or anything like that, where Google DeepMind has an edge. Here they don't have any edge. We need to deal with small data. And by the way, small data and an algorithm that's fed with one kind of Coke and a coffee, as Annabelle was saying, like not that much energy. There's no intelligence over there. So if we're gonna move towards that, I've always thought in terms of how do we humans do that? How do we keep on improving? Why are we so good and so efficient in terms of energy and scenario or like shifting the scenario, etc. When the context changes, we are very good at adapting. Why is that? I would think, okay, let's think of us as as if we were machines ourselves. And I think in terms of human beings, and I keep on wondering about stuff like the dreams. Why do we dream? And long story short, because it's a very long story, I've arrived to the conclusion that dreaming is a way for us to keep on exploring out of sample and getting it into the in sample so that we can react fast later on. And for that, we are extremely realistic. So that means that our simulations in our brain are extremely realistic as well. And by the way, we don't dream we are watching Netflix. We're dreaming in a very specific context where we have to take actions very rapidly. All right, so that we have that shortcut later on from our brains. As a result, I would say as a tool, generative AI can be very interesting for those scenarios, like even for the creation of news, for which our trading systems need to adapt, for instance, which would be lovely because this could be extremely realistic, and we can even link that to how the rest of the agents would react to that in the markets, etc., etc. We have a price for that on virtual reality simulation, and I think that's the future. And I think generative AI on that, which is like second derivative or third derivative when it comes to the usage of these kind of tools in finance, I think they will be lovely. But just on that second or third derivative, not just like as a platform, as the real thing for finance. Not at all. We need experts for a long while. Clement.
Thank you very much, Sergio.
And Annabelle, I know you have a very big interest actually in behavioral finance and the biases, we retail investors actually tends to have, when it comes to investing. So, and I know you're doing some work on that topic. So do you see a way where actually, that machine that could generate, that machine can do so many things could potentially, help now the advisors and the practitioner to help, fix or minimize those behavioral biases we all have?
I love this question. I think we're at the beginning of that journey. So I can't give you any brilliant answer to that today. We're actually hosting a workshop in Malmo later in the year. So maybe I can come back to you next year and come up with something. I mean, a couple of quick observations is that if you're even asking, that generative AI will respond to what you ask it. So if you're even asking it about your biases, then you're halfway there actually, because just being aware of the biases is part of it. But why do we have these biases? The heuristics and biases we have is because we can only process so much. And actually what AI is really good at doing is processing huge amounts of information. So I think this comes back to figuring out, we each of us need to figure out what are the bits that are time consuming for us and don't add much value and can be outsourced to something that can process huge amounts of information quickly. And where are the bits that we should be focusing our energies? And so getting one thing we can do with ChatGPT or Gen AI is get it to synthesize multiple sources and summarize multiple sources. And you could actively guide it with particular questions like, you could ask, what biases might I have? It's actually very good at summarizing and explaining biases. But also you could say, okay, from this point of, if I thought like this, what would the investment case be? If I thought like this, what would the investment case be? And you can compare and contrast. That's the sort of thing where it's very good at synthesizing different ideas. But I would say so far, AI has been better at using behavioral science to make us want more and more of the AI than we've been good at using the AI to help us managing our own behavioral biases. I think that's maybe that's the next phase.
So I think we'll be concluded actually, this evening now. I'd like to really, thank our speakers actually, because we're not easy actually to go on all those very different topics and some were traveling and everything, but I think, it was a very pleasant evening actually, from my spot. So thanks again, to all of you. I know we're going to actually make some materials available to the people who've attended actually, from some of you. And thank you again to our sponsor, for allowing us actually, to create these events for the CFA Society France. And I'll conclude on that. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you,
see
everyone.
you at the next event, actually, that we'll be doing later this year.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Rationnel.